With winter wrapping up, it's time to close the book on fall 2024 and see which comics made the biggest impact before we shift our focus to the books that have been heating up while the temperatures dropped. 2024 was a wild ride for comic collectors, but 2025 is shaping up to be even bigger with some major events on the horizon. So let's dive into the fall 2024 top 10 comics list and set the stage for what's coming next. Kicking off the list at number 10, we're taking a flashback to one of the most important comics in DC history with The Flash number 123, the issue that raced beyond a single universe and introduced the concept of the multiverse, changing comics for forever. Cover dated September 1961, Flash 123 is easily the most iconic issue from the series, in my opinion. From its legendary creative team, to the multiple Earths concept, to the classic cover that's been swiped time and time again, Flash 123 certainly does not need this lengthy of an introduction. Written by Gardner Fox with interior and cover art from Carmine Infantino, it was quite the creative pairing. Fox was one of the original co-creators of The Flash in January 1940's Flash Comics number 1, while Infantino was the artist behind the character's return in Showcase number 4 in 1956 after he'd taken a 7-year break. Like I mentioned in the intro, the big deal with this issue is the introduction of Earth 2, which is where you can find all of DC's Golden Age heroes, and also the first appearance of the Golden Age Flash in the Silver Age. The seeds planted here would go on to inspire countless future stories, peaking with Crisis on Infinite Earths, which would go down as one of the most influential comic stories of all time. Currently, prices for Flash 123 have dipped back below their comic boom levels in most grades. One of my favorite things about this issue is that it's affordable for collectors with a variety of budgets. If your budget maxes out around $350, CGC 2.0 or even 2.5 copies can be yours. There's a bit of price compression in the middle grades, meaning that $550 is where 3.0 copies have been landing recently, while you can ride all the way up to a CGC 5.0 for just a couple $100 more. But the fun is over pretty much once you hit 5.5, as this is the highest grade that you can pick up and stay below a 4-figure price tag with a current 90-day average sales price of $921. In the number 9 spot, we find a book that is no stranger to top 10 comic lists, and is honestly one that I've avoided for years for that very reason, but let's briefly talk about Amazing Spider-Man 300. You know the story here. Todd McFarlane art, David Michelinie's story. Crazy guy covered in black goo makes his first full appearance and looks like a badass pretty briefly before Eric Larson ruins it by giving him a drooling condition. Yeah, I mean, you really hate to see that. Anyway, this May 1988 issue of Amazing Spider-Man has been sought after from the moment it was released, and for pretty good reason. It's a great book, but much like the Macarena in late 1995, it's okay to be sick of hearing about it. The sole reason I bring it up is that ASM 300 is one of those books that's on a couple-year cycle where it gets a bit pricey, and then it cools off for a bit, and it's not so bad price-wise. We're currently in the phase where prices don't completely suck. CGC 8.0 copies have a 90-day average sales price of just $359 at the moment, which is pretty dang reasonable considering there are people out there paying $258 on average for CGC 4.0 copies. And while it sucks for me as a seller, CGC 9.2 and 9.4 copies are averaging roughly $500 and $600 price points respectively right now. Even the 9.8s are seeing a drop in price with a current 90-day average price of just $2,620 for a book that averaged $2,830 in 2024 and $3,645 back in 2023. Okay, so let's start the timer now. I'll bring this one up again sometime in 2030. In the number 8 spot, we're going to gaze into the magic 8 ball of future comic book speculation and make an obvious observation. Pre-code horror blew up several years back. Then the influencers hyped and pumped Bronze Age horror, and, it had its 15 minutes of fame. What's next, you might ask? I'm here to suggest that the next thing will be Copper Age horror. Now, how astute, right? They just keep moving one age ahead and telling us how awesome this stuff is, but we fall for it every single time. But While the number 8 book is what I consider to be the biggest and best Copper Age horror book there is, I'm not blowing smoke anywhere when I tell you that Evil Ernie number 1 is one of my favorite books, and I can't believe that I haven't talked about it in quite a while. Cover dated December 1991, Evil Ernie number 1 was published by Eternity Comics. Created by writer Brian Pulido with fantastic art from Stephen Hughes, Evil Ernie number 1 was not only Pulido's first published comic book, but it was also the first appearance of his two most popular characters to date, Evil Ernie and Lady Death. If you dig way back into the Como catalog, you'll actually find an interview I did with Pulido in the early days of the channel, which was a fun experience for me because I remember being a kid reading Wizard magazine, and when I saw Evil Ernie and Lady Death for the first time, I was just blown away by how cool they looked. Recent sales for higher grade CGC graded copies have mostly been slightly above previous sales prices. For instance, CGC 9.2 copies are averaging a sales price of $427 in the most recent 90 days, which is a 5% increase on the 2024 average sales price of $404. 9.4 and 9.6 copies haven't had any sales since November 2024, but they do have most recent sales prices of $500 for the 9.4 and $750 for the 9.6, and both of those sales were coming in stronger than their respective 2024 average sales prices. Interestingly, CGC 9.8 copies are coming in a little soft in the current 90-day period, with an average sales price of $2,326, down just slightly from the current 12-month average of $2,406. So later this year, when you see people hyping Faust, Cry for Dawn, Gore Shriek, Twisted Tales, Hellraiser, and Aracell's The Walking Dead, just remember you heard about it here first. Locked and loaded in the number 7 spot, we find the origin issue of Marvel's first Bronze Age anti-hero, The Punisher, and Marvel Preview number 2. Cover dated June 1975, Marvel Preview number 2's feature story, titled Death Sentence, was written by Punisher co-creator Jerry Conway and drawn by artist Tony DeZuniga, with a fantastic painted cover from Gray Morrow. Marvel magazines from the 70s have come a long way in recent years, as they were really underappreciated for a long time. Marvel Preview alone is stacked with key issues, and the horror mags are just as loaded. So it's great to see collectors including them in their hauls nowadays. You know the story. Frank Castle's family is killed, which sets him off to use his certain set of skills to seek revenge. Loud, messy, violent revenge. While her first appearance wasn't long-lived, Marvel Preview 2 is the first appearance of the Punisher's wife, Maria, and her last two, I suppose. Jerry just doesn't like his characters to have wives and girlfriends. That's all I can come up with. First it was Gwen, then it was Maria. Let's just say if Jerry Conway takes over your story arc, you best be preparing for that involuntary bachelor life, because it's only a matter of time with this guy. With a census count of 62 copies, CGC 9.8 copies are pretty tough on the wallet, with the most recent sale coming in at $2,565 back in December 2024. But if you have the ability to stomach an additional spine tick, an aesthetically pleasing 9.6 copy can be had for a much nicer price. Last month, a copy sold for only $475, which is actually a pretty great price, as a copy hasn't sold for so little since 2023. The 2024 price for a 9.6 tended to be more in the $600 to $660 price range. Now, very collectible CGC 9.0 copies are averaging out at just $195 in the most recent 90 days, if you'd like to add this one to your collection, but not have to dip too deeply into that income tax return to do so. Blasting off from the number 6 spot is an iconic sci-fi cover from the early 1950s that is dripping with classic sci-fi vibes. Our number 6 book is Weird Science number 5. Cover dated January-February 1951, this early EC Comics science fiction issue is on every short list of EC's best sci-fi covers. The Al Feldstein cover features a classically styled rocket ship escaping Earth's atmosphere as a rather sizable atomic blast can be seen over Texas. Under the cover, you'll find stories from Bill Gaines, Feldstein, and Harvey Kurtzman, with art from the EC bullpen masters such as Feldstein, Kurtzman, Wally Wood, and Jack Kamen, who even got an assist from his son Bart on a certain story. A fun fact about Weird Science number 5 is that it's actually the first renumbered issue in the series. The first 4 issues were numbered 12, 13, 14, and 15. So be careful if you're ever buying a Weird Science 12, 13, 14, or 15, and make sure you're buying the issue that you think you are, because there are 2 of each of those. The things publishers used to do to save a little money, am I right? This is a book that doesn't have a huge census count, with just a total of 92 graded copies as of the recording of this video. And while my first thought was, well, there must be a decent number of raw sales for this one then, that was not right at all. In fact, I can't find where a single copy of this issue is sold yet in 2025. Our most recent sale was from back in December 2024, when a really nice CGC 7.5 copy sold for $720, which I'm sure made the person who bought a CGC 7.0 copy in August 2024 for $1,020 a little sad. Prior to that, in November 2024, a CGC 5.5 sold for $264. It's nice to see a comic that is as classic as this still remain affordable in the mid-grades, especially in a time when its cousins over on the horror side of things are anything but affordable in the current market. Smashing its way to the top half of the list after clobbering its way to the number 5 spot is one of the best hero versus hero covers in all of the hobby in Fantastic Four number 112. Cover dated July 1971, FF112 is far from the first Thing vs. Hulk issue, but the John Buscema cover is top tier. In a Stan Lee story aptly titled Battle of the Behemoths, Buscema sticks around to handle the interior art as well. The story is pretty straightforward. It's a knockdown, drag-out brawl through New York City featuring 2 of the Marvel Universe's biggest bruisers. The cover for FF112 is a bit of a callback to Submariner number 8, where we also see the Thing squaring off against another hero against an all-black background. But it all makes sense when you realize that both of these covers were drawn by John Buscema. The man works well with those black backgrounds, and I don't think anyone will deny that. Taking a look at recent sales, it's a little surprising how quickly values for this thing spike up. CGC 8.5 copies are averaging out at $493 in the most recent 90 days, while CGC 8.0s come in at just $282 over the same period. When we move up to the CGC 9.2 copies, it's going to take $1,000, or more specifically, $1,007 on average over the most recent 90 days to bring a copy of this one home. While it may not hold a first appearance or some major plot point of significance, this book looks great on display, and it's a book I consider to be a scroll stopper. If you're flipping through a run of FF and you flip up on FF112, chances are you're going to take a second and pull it out and look it over. The cover is just that good. We all go a little mad sometimes, according to Psycho's Norman Bates, but that was in the 60s. When you're talking funny books, and it's still the Leave It to Beaver world of the 1950s, you've got to go mad like a hatter, and that's exactly what we're going to do with our number 4 book, Detective Comics number 230. Cover dated April 1956, Tech 230's cover shows the dynamic duo in quite a bind, as a crazy guy has them tied up and he's reaching for the bat cowl so that he can add it to his trophy wall of hats you can see in the background. That's right, boys and girls, we're talking about Bat Villain, the Mad Hatter, well, the second one anyway, who makes their first appearance in this issue. Claiming to be Jervis Tech, which is the name of the original Mad Hatter from October 1948's Batman number 49, this Hatter looked nothing like the Golden Age version of the character. The original Mad Hatter would eventually return and reclaim his title from this imposter Mad Hatter, who would go on to claim the moniker of the Hat Man in Batman number 700. The Batman story in this issue of Detective was titled The Mad Hatter of Gotham City, and it was written by the real creative genius behind Batman, Bill Finger, with art from Sheldon Moldoff, a DC legend himself. Artist Win Mortimer provided the cover art for the issue. This issue jumped up in price quite a bit in the time since the lockdown. With only 150 copies on CGC Census, the most common grades are 3.0 and 3.5, with 15 copies of each graded. But it's their neighbor to the north, the CGC 4.0, that's actually seen the highest number of sales overall, despite none of those sales taking place in the most recent 21 months. Now, thankfully, there have been quite a few recent sales, with the most recent in February 2025 for a CGC 5.5 copy that sold for $1,275 and a CGC 7.5 copy that sold for $3,080, along with 2 January 2025 sales as well. A CGC 6.0 sold for $1,450, while a 4.5 copy sold for $1,080. If your budget doesn't allow you to chase 4-figure copies, it's a bit more of a crapshoot with values. 2024 sales for lower grade copies include October sales in 1.5 and 1.0 for $569 and $285 respectively, while a pair of August sales in 1.8 and 2.5 saw results of $390 and $456. And if you want to shoot for the moon, a 9.2 sold in September 2024 for $31,200, but I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for another copy in that grade to come up for sale. Looking ahead, 2025 is going to be a really busy year for the MCU, and all the way out in December, we find Wonder Man dropping on Disney+, so let's check in on Avengers number 9 in the number 3 spot. What caught my eye about Avengers 9 is how much of a drop this issue has seen in the mid and upper grades. Looking at GPA, it's almost entirely red arrows from 5.5 to 8.5 right now. Cover dated October 1964, Avengers 9 is the first appearance of Wonder Man. Unfortunately, he also eats it in this issue. The issue sports a Jack Kirby cover, while Don Heck takes over the pencils for the interior art for the Stan Lee story. Like most keys and semi-keys, Avengers 9 went a little crazy during the boom years, but it's now returning to more realistic numbers. With 2,102 graded copies on the census, there are quite a few copies of this one floating around out there, and lots more raw copies as well, if that's more your thing. The current 90-day average sales price for a CGC 6.0 copy is $334, with the most recent sale coming in at only $249. CGC 7.5s are averaging $450 in the most recent 90 days, which is actually $37 less than the average price for a 7.0 in the same time frame. A CGC 8.5 even sold for only $840 last month. That's a book that has been plus or minus $1,500 for the last 2 years. There's also been a ton of price compression with Avengers 9. You're going to pay $152 on average for a CGC 3.0 copy right now, but for $100 more, you can bring home a CGC 5.0. Or you can FOMO and spend $10 a pop on the 80s and 90s Wonder Man number 1s that are out there with thousands and thousands of copies in circulation, and honestly, they'll probably never break the $20 mark for any sustained period. The choice is yours, but if it were me, I'd go for the Silver Age single-digit issue of the Avengers over the modern filler that was weighing down discount boxes in recent memory. Hell, they may still be. Choose your own adventure. Break out the nunchucks and call the pizza dude, because we're catching up with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles number 1 in the number 2 spot. Well, a quick disclaimer, check your local laws because some states don't know how to party and they've actually banned nunchucks unless you're a martial artist. And while I'm not a lawyer, I'm pretty sure if you have nunchucks, you're officially a ninja. Whether or not that's going to hold up in court or not, I can't really say. While we're handing out disclaimers, I should also note that we're talking about TMNT number 1, third print. As much as I'm sure we'd all love to have first prints, those things are pricey. Released in February 1985 following the May 1984 first printing release and the June 1984 release of the second printing, the third print of TMNT 1 is the final printing that retained the original cover art in the unusual oversized shape of the original printing. Whereas the first printing was only 3,000 copies and the second printing was 6,000 copies, the third printing got serious and they ran 35,000 copies, according to the print run information that was provided inside of the Turtle Mania special Mirage put out in 1986. TMNT number 1 was meant to be a one and done story, which explains why the story was so neatly buttoned up at the end with the death of the Shredder. But remember, this is comics, and nobody other than Uncle Ben stays dead. As we all know now, TMNT number 1 blew up, and from its success sprang a 62-issue original comic run, a massively successful cartoon series that inspired one of the biggest toy lines in history, countless other licensed products, and another entire comic book series based off of the cartoon. Not too shabby. Of those 35,000 produced copies, 2,789 of them have found their way to CGC for grading. Now honestly, that's surprisingly low for the number of copies of this book I see for sale graded, but I think the most obvious explanation for that is that the third print is the collector's foothold into the TMNT 1 world, with almost everybody wanting to work their way up to either a second print or maybe even a first print. I really miss the days when you could walk into an LCS or a comic show and pick up nice copies of this book for $100 or $150 like it was nothing. Well, unfortunately, that ship has sailed. On the low end today, you're going to be in the $300 to $350 range if you're pretty lucky, with most raw sales now pushing the $500 to $600 mark. As far as graded copies go, 9.2s are just barely staying under $1,000 for the time being, while CGC 8.0s are averaging sales of $325 across the last 90 days. But let's all take a moment for quiet reflection for the TMNT collector on the board with the most questionable purchase of 2025 thus far, as somebody bought a CGC 6.5 copy for $1,029 on February 8th. I have no idea what happened there. The grader's notes don't mention any signatures or remarks or anything that could possibly justify that amount. Let's just all hope that they are eventually able to financially recover from that decision. Topping the top 10 comics list for the fall of 2024 is Daredevil number 7. I'm behind on most comic-related series right now, but I was Johnny on the spot for Daredevil Born Again when it dropped earlier this week, and it got me thinking that it's time for Daredevil 7 to get a little shine. I know I've talked about this one in the past, but it's been a long while ago, and seeing the much more comic-accurate portrayal of Daredevil in Born Again's cold open, this pick was a no-brainer. Cover dated April 1965, Daredevil 7's claim to fame is the introduction of Daredevil's classic red costume. I mean, not that we don't have love for the yellow costume, but I mean, come on. The red costume is the first thing that comes to mind when any of us think about Daredevil, unless you grew up in the 90s and that awful armored black costume is your default, and in that case, I'm going to be praying for you. The story in Mortal Kombat with the Submariner was written by Stan Lee and is a great fallback plot for any title when you got nothing else. Make your lead fight another hero. Fortunately for us, DD7 was released in the very narrow window of time that Wally Wood was drawing the book. Wood is a legend in the hobby and one of EC's most well-known artists. Wood was also Daredevil's cover and interior artist beginning with issue 5 through issue 10, when he was bumped down to just inking for issue 11, and then he was completely off the book by the time issue 12 came out. Daredevil 7's been a very collectible issue for a long time now, and it seems to cycle around every few years, with it getting another 15 minutes of fame before slowly fading back into the crowd, and then repeating the cycle again. The census has a total of 2,842 copies reporting, which is good news for us because we have a pile of comps to reference for this one. The hottest grades in the most recent 90 days are the 7.0s and 5.5s, both of which have 6 sales reporting, with the CGC 4.5s right behind them with 5 sales. Starting with the 7.0s, the most recent sale was for $597 earlier this month, with the 90-day average coming in a slight bit lower at $557. The 5.5s are averaging $358 over the same period, with a most recent sale on the lower end at just $315. The 5 sales for the CGC 4.5s are averaging sales prices of $262, with the most recent sale right in line at $260 earlier this month. My favorite thing about this issue is that you can run all the way up to a graded 8.0 copy and still be well under $1,000. There have been 2 sales in 8.0 in the most recent 90 days, and they average out to $865, which is pretty great for a fairly early Silver Age Marvel book, and especially one that has this deep purple cover that is notoriously easy to break color at stress points. That's a wrap on the fall 2024 top 10 comics lists, but as winter fades and spring starts to emerge, we've got even more to talk about. Some books have been heating up through the colder months, and with the comic market waking up for a new season, it's the perfect time to break things down with the Winter 2025 Top 10 Comics series, beginning shortly with the Top 10 Comics on a $100 budget. So if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed and ready, because a new season means new opportunities in collecting. Collect responsibly, and I'll see you in the next video.